Hello. So I am Hayden Pastor, and my video project number 1 is on the deltoid. So what about the deltoid? Well, the deltoid is a muscle that when you talk to normal people that are not kinesiology students or anything like that, you say, oh, your shoulder muscle, they normally think the deltoid. And they don't think that they think the deltoid, but that's the muscle that they're referring to when they talk about the shoulder muscle. So that is kind of the umbrella term of shoulder muscle in the normal world. It's a large triangular shaped muscle that lies over the glenohumeral joint and gives the shoulder its rounded contour. The cool thing about the deltoid, has 3 different parts to it. It has an anterior, middle, and posterior portion. Now, these fibers, they all have the same insertion and innervation, but they have different origins. The anterior fibers on the front side have an origin of the anterior lateral third of the clavicle, while the middle fibers of the deltoid have an origin of the lateral aspect of the acromion, whereas the posterior fibers originate at the inferior edge of the spine of the scapula. Now, they all insert in the same place, which is the deltoid tuberosity on the lateral humerus. Same thing with innervation. They all are innervated by the same nerve, which is the axillary nerve. Now, just like the origin, we have different actions and palpations for all 3 sections of the deltoid. So these actions for the anterior one, the anterior fibers, are abduction, flexion, horizontal adduction, internal rotation, and diagonal adduction of the glenohumeral joint. Now, for the middle fibers of the deltoid, the actions that those fibers help along with is abduction, horizontal abduction of the glenohumeral joint as well. And for the posterior fibers, the actions that those fibers help with are abduction, extension, horizontal abduction, external rotation, and diagonal abduction of the glenohumeral joint. Now, for palpation, same thing. The 3 different fibers have different ways that they are palpated. So for the anterior fibers, you are going to palpate from the clavicle towards the anterior humerus during resisted flexion or horizontal adduction. Now, for the middle fibers, you are going to palpate from the lateral border of the acromion down toward the deltoid tuberosity during resisted abduction. And lastly, the posterior fibers of the deltoid are going to be palpated from the lower lip of the spine of the scapula toward the posterior humerus during resisted extension or horizontal abduction. Abduction, the upward lateral movement of the humerus in the frontal plane out to the side away from the body. Flexion, movement of the humerus straight anteriorly from any point in the sagittal plane. Extension, movement of the humerus straight posteriorly from any point in the sagittal plane. Extension. Horizontal adduction, we start here straight out to the side, 90 degrees. Movement of the humerus in a horizontal or transverse plane toward and across the chest. Same idea as horizontal adduction. The horizontal abduction starts straight across, 90 degrees. Now the movement of the humerus in a horizontal or transverse plane away from the chest. Go back. Internal rotation, movement of the humerus in the transverse plane medially around its long axis towards the midline. And the opposite of internal rotation, we have external rotation, which is the movement of the humerus laterally in the transverse plane around its long axis away from the midline. We have diagonal adduction, which is the movement of the humerus in a diagonal plane toward the midline of the body. And then finally, we have diagonal abduction, which is the movement of the humerus in a diagonal plane away from the midline of the body. So now that we saw all the origin insertions and we talked about all the different actions that those 3 different fibers of the deltoid help along with, what does this really mean? In real life, we don't talk about just those normal actions, but we talk in more broad terms, things that normal people that are not kinesiology professors and students that they can understand. So let's go over some of those. Some daily usage examples of the deltoid. Well, overall, any lifting movement you do is going to involve the deltoid. So any movement of the humerus is going to involve part or all of the deltoid. For the anterior fibers, an example a daily usage of those would be for reaching. Like if you're reaching in the kitchen to grab something from a top shelf or a bookshelf or vice versa, anything of that reaching motion. Now for the middle fibers, something that's very common in people's everyday workouts or practice or sports or anything like that is jumping jacks. Those jumping jacks uses the middle fibers of our deltoid. Now, as for the posterior fibers, maybe not everyone's done this. I know I have, and a lot of people do. They are used in pitching a baseball. So using that arm and throwing a ball, baseball, softball, whatever you want to say, just throwing, that's going to use those posterior fibers of the deltoid. Now, how can we stretch it? Well, there's many ways to stretch the deltoid. In the body, there's many ways to stretch almost any muscle, right? But we're just going to go over a few key ones that are very common. So we're going to show these in a video, but here we have pictures demonstrating what I'm about to demonstrate as well. We're going to go over the anterior, the posterior, and the middle fibers. One way to stretch your anterior deltoid fibers, you want to clasp your hands behind your back and simply pull them as far as you can. Don't pull them to the point of pain. You just want to feel the stretch in that anterior side of your deltoid in the front of your shoulder. One way to stretch the posterior fibers of that deltoid is to take one of your arms, can be left or right. You want to do both to make sure you stretch both sides equally. But for this point, we're going to do the left arm. Stretch that across the body. Then take your forearm of your other arm and place it above your elbow and press on that arm so it's towards your body, but also in that direction. You want to almost pull the arm with this forearm. It's a combination of pushing towards yourself and also pulling to the side, and you should feel a nice stretch in that posterior side of that deltoid. Now, the middle fibers of the deltoid are a little more tricky to feel a stretch in, but one way you can do it, you're going to want to take one hand behind the back, and you're going to want to clasp it with the other hand, grab your wrist or like right above the wrist with your other hand. So we're going to do that right here, and then you're simply going to pull that arm with that other hand. And make sure you don't have any tension in this arm being pulled so it can really feel the stretch. And pull it nice and hard until you feel a stretch in those middle fibers, that center part of your shoulder. And then stretching and regression and progression is also something that we can consider. All right, so a way where we can do a regression of the anterior fibers of the deltoid. Remember, the stretch we demonstrated was this one right here, the arms clasped. One way we can do that, if that's a little difficult or you can't get much range of motion doing that, you can grab either a towel or a t-shirt. I have a t-shirt right here. You're simply going to do the same stretch, except you're going to hold that towel right here, and it's going to give you a little more range of motion where you're able to do that a little more easily. Your hands are going to have to be as close together if you're someone who has a different body shape or body type or anything like that. All right, and now to advance the anterior deltoid stretch, a progression of the stretch that we did prior, what you're going to want to do is find a doorway or a ledge or something that you can really pull your weight on. Doorways work really great. You want to take your hand, put it on the edge, and simply let your body weight pull you forward. My dog wants to participate as well. So you want to let your body weight pull it forward, shift it, so your arm is you're only holding on by your arm, and that is going to feel a nice anterior fiber stretch of that deltoid. Awesome. So now we looked at how we're going to stretch them and how we can advance the stretch, how we can simplify the stretch. Now, how can we strengthen it? That's another very important aspect of kinesiology, is how can we strengthen the muscle? So here we're going to demonstrate through just a few exercises when we're going to do push-ups, and we're also going to do plank walks. And I'm going to have my roommate demonstrate those for us. Now that we saw the basics form of the push-up and the plank walk, how can we do a regression and progression of the push-up? Push-up is a very common exercise that almost anyone can recognize and anyone can do. Maybe not well, but everyone can do it in some way or form. So let's look at my roommate Daniel do a regression and progression of a push-up. Great. So now we covered stretching, strength, and all the above about the deltoid. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because all these are aspects of how to prevent or how to treat injuries if they may come up. So injuries happen, and the deltoid is not unique to them not happening. So most deltoid injuries are usually a result of overuse. Yes, strains and tears do happen, but it's most commonly the deltoid is injured from overuse of the muscle. So we have a few common deltoid injuries that I'm going to go over. Deltoid tendinitis is the inflammation of your rotator cuff and the surrounding muscles and tendons. This is common in athletes and people with extremely physical jobs, hence the overuse. When you're using it physically over and over and over again, you're going to come up with that tendinitis. Another common injury of the deltoid in the shoulder is shoulder impingement. This is also known as swimmer shoulder. We see it very common in swimmers who are very active swimming every single day. This occurs when the tendons in your shoulder get pinched by the bones, causing pain. Another injury that is very common is shoulder bursitis. This occurs when the bursa sacs become swollen and inflamed in your shoulder. And the last one that we are going to talk about and touch is frozen shoulder. This frozen shoulder is a stiffness or inability to move your shoulder due to adhesions that develop and tighten or freeze the shoulder, hence the name frozen shoulder. So those are just a few injuries that can happen. Obviously, there's more out there and there's more in depth that we can go, but those are just common ones that we see like every day with people overuse and whatnot. So that completes my presentation, my video project number 1 on the deltoid. I hope it was informative and clear and concise. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.